Welcome to the Blogger Genius Podcast, brought to you by Milo Tree. Here's your host, Jillian Leslie.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Blogger Genius Podcast. I am your host, Jillian Leslie. I'm super glad that you're joining me. I have a question. Are you a member of my Facebook group? It's really nice in there. I'm in there live, answering questions, asking questions, creating community. So it is called the Become a Blogger Genius Facebook group. Super easy. Please pause this episode, head on over to Facebook and join it. I would love to welcome you in the group. For today's episode, I have Dara Sklar back on the podcast for a second appearance. She is a productivity coach. Her site is Learn with Dara. You guys loved her first episode. I did as well. That's why she is back to share 5 more incredibly helpful tips. I think you're going to want to take notes. The goal is to make your business run more smoothly so you can really enjoy what you're building. So without further delay, here is my interview with Dara Sklar. Dara, welcome back to the Blogger Genius Podcast. It is so great to see you again.
Thanks so much. You get to have the honor of being the very first podcast that I'm on that has invited me back. So I appreciate you.
Well, I have to say, I found your part 1 so inspiring, and I took so many of the tips you shared into my own life and business, and it turns out it connected with my audience. It's one of my top podcasts, so I wanted to reach out to you again to say, share more tips, share more tips. And so, and as I mentioned in my last podcast, what I love about you is that your advice is all about aligning with the person. It's not Dara's advice, like you need to do it this way because it's my way. It's who are you as a person and how can you find systems that line up with who you are. So I said this in the last one, like you're so not judgy and you're so like, hey, do you and organize around kind of your strengths and weaknesses. So that's what I found so inspiring and useful.
I'm so glad. And it's really wonderful to actually have that kind of feedback because, well, whenever you do something with a certain intent and then that intent is exactly met, it just makes me happy that I can not only help people and help you, but also just that my message is being received in the manner in which it was designed.
Oh, I'm so glad about that. And what I think that you put a different spin on kind of organization and systems because you don't have to be super anal to make it work for you.
No, that's exactly right. I think you just have to think through. I mean, we talked about this in the other episode, but it's like, what's tomorrow look like and how can you make that easier? And what are the decisions that you can make today, even if they're small ones, the things that take you a few seconds today that will make tomorrow or next week or next month or next year just that much smoother or with less resistance. Because there's like, I don't know about you, but there are things that I don't like doing. And those things take the longest to get to, even if they hardly take any time to complete. But it's like the dread of doing it and the procrastination of starting it can actually usually take more time than actually completing the task. So I think the more that we can make things easy for our future selves, and I think this way across the board, like with every aspect of my life, the better off we're going to be. And just the more like naturally productive we can become. It doesn't have to be like productive doesn't mean working harder. It can just mean being a little smarter with the way that you do things.
Absolutely. And I really like this idea of splitting ourselves into our present self and our future self. And the goal, and it's like befriending yourself, right? Like my future self is my girlfriend and I want her to be successful. So what can I do today to make her life better? And I told you this in the last podcast episode. There are times where I know I've created a document. I don't know where it is. I go searching for it going like, what would I have named it? And then it turns out that my instinct is correct and that I find it. And I kind of thank my past self going, you hooked me up. Thank you. And so I really like this idea because I think there's something very sweet about, I want to be kind to my future self, like it's somebody else that I'm in a relationship with.
Well, and actually, I think you've now just given me an even better way to explain this in general, which is you wouldn't, for lack of a better word, you wouldn't screw your friend over. So why would you do that for somebody else, right? So if you're thinking about that friend who's going to be doing this task or following up on this thing or searching for that document, or, repeating something a year later that you did, something tax related that you do today that's going to have to show up again in 12 months. Like, you wouldn't make it hard for them. So don't make it hard for yourself, make it easy for yourself. And then you just have that, like, I have so many times in life where I just have such sincere appreciation for the me from,
Yes.
a month or a year ago.
And I feel like we're all a work in progress. And our whole goal is to come to the place of self-love. And what better way to do it than to hook up your future self?
Totally. I love it.
All right. So we are going to share 5 more tips to help people get organized, kind of, what would you say? Like, find a way to create systems that will set you up and save you time and give you less dread.
Yeah. And like, the saving you time also comes with that beautiful companion, which is keeping your bandwidth sacred,
Yes.
So if things are running smoothly, or if you don't have to think about everything from scratch, then there's this wonderful opportunity to have like white space in your life, which is where we are most creative, is when we're not also trying to mentally juggle the other 12 things we have to do that afternoon.
Absolutely. Okay. So let's start with number 1, which is automation. How do we automate things in our businesses?
So I think the first step, and there are people who are automation experts, and I'm not going to claim to be one, but I will say that you start looking at things that you do, that you repeatedly do, that you repeatedly say, that you repeatedly write. You start looking at those things through a new lens, which is, if I'm repeating this, how can I make this easier next time? And I'm going to give you some really basic examples. The email software that I use one, which is Gmail, as we talked about on our last call. And I probably use this as one of the tips, which was creating reply templates. Well, and I also have something similar inside of the email software that I use called Help Scout, which is every time I write, any kind of response that I think, oh, this is well worded, I go and I save that text as a possible reply for future use. And I obviously name it so that I can find it. But I'm constantly looking through that lens. So the first step is really just recognizing what could be repeated. Another thing, this is maybe not specifically an automation, but every time I have, let's say, an affiliate link, I'm always creating redirects inside of my WordPress website. So I have a redirects plugin on WordPress. And so if I'm part of something, or if I'm promoting something, I have my own version of that shortcut, with dara.com/whatever I've got going, that whatever I'm promoting, so that out of my head, I know what that is. I don't have to go hunting for that affiliate link to hand it to someone. I just know it, and I can, you know what I mean? So
explain how you set that up. Explain that.
Sure. So, that. I'm going to assume that your audience understands WordPress websites.
Yep.
Bloggers. Yes. Good. I'm glad to hear that. And so there's a redirect plugin. So plugins are just add-ons that you have for your website. And the redirect plugin that I am currently using is called Better Links. And it's really nice, actually. It kind of has a bunch of columns, just like you would have in Trello, so you can categorize things. But part of my business ends up being promoting other people's products. And so at any given moment, and through my nurture email sequence, of course, I don't know if your audience, has opt-ins for people to join their email lists. I would assume that a good part of them do. And when you're emailing people, you're not always only offering them the things that you have. You also are offering them things that might be relevant to them at whatever stage of business they're at. And so I have, at any given moment, about a dozen different active offers from my friends and colleagues that would suit my audience, that are part of my email nurture sequences. And sometimes I hand those out. And yes, some of them are already all plugged in. But what I've done is, in that redirects plugin, Better Links, I have a column, and it's all of my affiliate links. And so if you had a product for sale and I was recommending your product for sale, I would have maybe withdara.com / and in my head, I would put /Jillian because that's how I would remember it. So I put it in using a keyword that I will remember as opposed to like the name of the product, unless that's the thing I would remember, because it's just an internal reference for me. And then I plug that, I use that anywhere I go. So if we're on this, podcast, it makes it really easy if I say to you, oh, go to withdara.com /top 40, which is a redirect in case anybody wants to get my top 40 Google hacks you'll wish you'd been using all along. But there's my redirect, right? So I can verbally give it out. I can easily remember it and hand it to people. And it makes for a kind of automation. It's not necessarily happening. The redirection is happening automatically. And it's saving me from having to go look up, oh, let me go get you that link. No, I have it. It's like at the tip of my fingers or in my head.
Got it. Okay. We're going to move. Yeah, go ahead.
I know you want to move on. And I just want to say that there is, I'm sure this is not an unfamiliar term, but Zapier or Zapier. I don't know how it's pronounced.
It's Zapier.
Zapier.com. Yeah. Zapier, thank you. So Zapier.com is software that actually has a whole bunch of what they call recipes. I think they call them recipes for other automations. It's much more advanced, but there's so much that can be done. So what I would say is, like, I've given just a couple of really basic automation examples that are easy things to do, because what we're trying to do is just kind of, reuse something that's like, take the thing that we've taken the time to do and then use that to be faster the next time. But if you go and take a look at Zapier, you can actually see there's all kinds of things. You can add things to spreadsheets automatically. You can have, there's just, I will not do it justice if I try and give you any examples, but I would say to anybody whose curiosity is piqued on the automation topic is go and explore Zapier. Did I say it right?
Zapier, I think.
Zapier. I'm going to just flip flop back and forth on the pronunciation. But go check it out, because that's like the kind of gold standard of automation software.
Let's move on to internal documentation. What is that and how do you do it?
Okay, so this is me. This is like the epitome of being kind to my future self, because I know, for example, anything that I only do like once a quarter or once a year, especially if it was something that I struggled to do in the first place, that doesn't just come naturally to me, that I'm going to remember off the top of my head exactly how to do it. Anything that falls into that category is something that I force myself kicking and screaming sometimes, but I create an internal, it could be a messy document, but like I take some screenshots, I take some notes. What I do is, once I've figured out the thing, I write the letter to my future self and I'm like, hey, Dara. I don't really say, hey, Dara, but I say, hey, Dara, you hated doing this last time, but let me make it easy for you. Screenshot. Here are the things. Don't forget, this is how you, whatever. And that, it's always accounting things that come to mind when I use this example, but it's like, oh, submitting that payroll file to the government once a year, or running such and such a list of reports for my accountant once a year. Or, it's always these financial tasks. And especially, we talked about this already, but like, I just always laugh at myself at how long it takes me to get to do something that I'm dreading. And this internal documentation is just notes to self, but it's notes to self so that when you come back around to the same topic, that it's no longer scary, because you're like, I know how to do this because I did it before, and I don't have to remember because I was nice to my future self and I wrote it down.
Yeah. One of the worst things I find is it's a piece of software, let's say, and I haven't used it in a long time. And it's like, I have to relearn how. I was using my phone today and I was taking doing a scan of a document, turning it into a PDF by taking a photo of it. Right. And it's not intuitive if you ever do it. And every single time I have to go, how do I do that again? Like what? And then I mess it up. And then I have to ask my husband. And I think to myself, the amount of brain power I have wasted because I do it, let's say twice a year. And so I don't remember how to do it. And then I have to go to YouTube and then I have to relearn. And I love what you're saying, which is, again, just take some screenshots and be like, here's the menu. How many times do you end up on a piece of software you've used in the past and you're like, where did that menu go?
And I think there's something to be added to this thought process, which is, it doesn't mean you have to go and document every single thing you're doing right now all the time. So, for example, I just recently I've decided to do an experiment where I'm in Canada. And so I'm going to offer the course that I sell in Canadian dollars at a slightly different price, like 37 US, so it'll be 47 Canadian. But I'm going to run Facebook ads to a Canadian copy of everything that I offer, but like that was in US dollars. So of course, I built all this 18 months ago, and I'm making the copy, and I'm thinking to myself, gee, I wish I had stopped at the end and documented all the things that I was supposed to double check to make sure it was running properly, right? So what am I doing this time? Well, I'm doing that, and I'm making the list of all the things. So it's not, I didn't do it last time for whatever reason, but it's like, you can always just find that one thing. Like, what's the one thing? It doesn't have to be for everything. I don't want anybody feeling like a failure just because they didn't document something that one time. You can document it next time, but just know that how much of a relief it is, how much of a weight off your shoulders when you have that proper, when you've taken the time to, again, to be kind to your future self. And it's honestly, it's actually this conversation that is making me determined that when I'm finished that little task of duplicating everything, that I'm just going to take some notes and just, it could be as simple as like a handful of bullet points in a Google Doc. Like, it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be fancy or look good.
Right.
It's for yourself. It's internal documentation.
Right.
It's not for public consumption or even to like hand to an assistant. Like, it's just for you.
Yeah.
It could become those things later, which we'll talk about. And it actually, I think this is a perfect time to transition to item number 3.
Yes.
Which is what we named piggybacking. Because if you take a task that you already have to do, and you're basically creating some kind of internal documentation, that's what we call piggybacking. And the example was something I did. I was probably, I actually coined a term recently called productive procrastination. And it's when you're avoiding something, but you do something else that requires your attention and time. And so a couple of weeks ago, I was productively procrastinating, and I had received a new credit card in the mail, and it's the card that pays for most of my subscriptions. So it, pays for my monthly subscriptions, my weekly, Upwork that I pay weekly, annual, all of these. I probably have at least 20 items that I pay for on a recurring basis where my credit card is saved on file with a company. And of course, I have to log in to every single one of those companies. I have to update my credit card. We've all been there, right? Whether it's because the expiry date changes or there's fraud or whatever, like it's a necessary evil of being in business. If you run your own finances, you have to do this at some point. And I piggybacked off of having to do that task. And I got out my Asana. If anybody isn't already familiar with Asana, there's a free tier, you can pay for it too, but it's a free project management tool it's very, very versatile. It can do a lot of things, but my favorite thing to use it for is to just create little to-do lists that have due dates and recurrences. So I went and every single time I logged into a site to update my card, I grabbed the link to where I logged in or what page I landed on, put it in the comments. And then I added not only the amount of money that I was spending, but the the date that it renews, as well as whether it's monthly, annual, and so on. So now not only did I accomplish that task, but I've actually given myself an even better view of my financial picture for my business. If something happens, knock wood, but I'm traveling, and what happens if my credit card gets stolen in a month? Well, if I were to have to go and do this over again, I mean, it took me a few hours the first time around, but it was going to take a few hours regardless. I just tacked on a little bit of extra work. But could you imagine how fast I'm going to be able to do that? Because I won't have to go looking for what I'm paying. I had to go into my credit cards and my QuickBooks, and in order to find all the different payments that I needed to update, I had to do quite a bit of legwork. Well, I've done all the legwork now, and it's all in a list. So if I had to go tomorrow and do this all over again, guaranteed it'll be done in under an hour because I made it that easy for myself. So this is like that piggybacking, the documentation that's piggybacking on something you already have to do. So you're just making it even that much more of an accomplishment to have done that task.
Totally. And I used this quick example because I had recently done this. It's like, your drawer gets kind of messy, your sweater drawer. And so instead of just refolding your sweaters, while you're doing that, go through your sweaters and go, which ones can I give to Goodwill? So it's like doing each one separately. You might do them separately, but this way you go, oh, I'm going to consciously get rid of sweaters that I don't wear and make my drawer nicer. And so it's like, what else could you add on that doesn't feel so burdensome? So that again, now you've got a really nice drawer and you're not carrying around all those extra sweaters that you hated from 5 years ago. So I love that idea.
Yeah. And it's not a make work project. It's not like you went into your drawer to say, what can I give to Goodwill? You were like, while I'm in here, let me do this. And the same with me. It wasn't like I decided to make this list of all my financial obligations. I did that because I had to update my credit card. So I was just allowing something that, one thing to almost become a secondary task without it adding a whole bunch of extra work, but then actually giving me quite a lot of benefit.
Yeah. And I want to say that when you're talking about extra work, for me, it's pain. Like these things are I dread them. I don't, I just finished my taxes and it's like such a headache. And so I like this idea of how do you reduce the headache? How do you, what is the word? How do you bundle these things together so the overall headache is less intense and you don't have multiple headaches? You just have like one slightly bigger headache, but it's okay. It's like, you're just going to get that pain over with. It's kind of like how people talk about, batching content. It's like batch the headache. I wanted to take a short break to ask you a question. Do you have an audience, say an email list, social media followers, blog traffic? And if your answer is yes, do you know there's money to be made by serving that audience directly? If you've ever thought about selling a paid workshop, a membership, coaching, MiloTree Easy Payments is your answer. MiloTree Easy Payments is a payment platform. We give you free checkout pages, free unlimited sales pages, a dashboard to manage your customers, but most importantly, we put money directly into your bank account. If this sounds interesting to you and you want to find out more, head to milotreepayments.com. If you are just starting to think about selling digital products, I recommend setting up a paid workshop where you teach something to your attendees for 1 hour on Zoom. Now, if you don't know what that topic should be, I have a free worksheet for you. Just head to milotree.com/workshop idea. That's it, milotree.com/workshop idea. And you'll have an idea in no time. So start building a whole new easy income stream with MiloTree Easy Payments. And now back to the show. All right, let's talk about creating procedures.
So this is like the very next level. This is like what we talked about. Internal documentation is like your notes to self. Procedures is like the, cousin to that, where it's something you can hand to someone else. And I'll say that, I'm really good at writing procedures for things that I'm like tasks that I do that I'm handing off to my assistant, but it takes a really long time. So you have to bite the bullet and recognize that when you take the time and then you write the procedure and then you hand it off, and there's just this time, it's just a time consuming process to perfect the thing that you're going to hand off. And what I wanted to say is that it doesn't have to be you that proceduralizes things. So I'm going to actually, not that these things are together, but I'm actually going to reveal what our next step is, because I think that these two really can go hand in hand, because our fifth item was to outsource. And one of my favorite things to do is to document for the procedure using a Loom video. If anybody doesn't know what a Loom video is, it's a screen share. And so you're showing your screen, you're speaking, you have to have a microphone, but basically it records whatever's on your screen and your voice, and you can step by step demonstrate and explain what you're doing. Loom.com, if anybody's looking, my favorite. It's probably the tool that I use the most often, second to email. But what you can do if you have an assistant, and we'll talk more about like outsourcing and like starting to outsource, but if you already had someone, you would create the little procedure just by demonstrating and speaking and hand it over to them to actually write that procedure. So it doesn't always have to be something you do yourself, but the idea is that you're creating a document so that somebody else can follow the steps and do something you don't want to do.
I love that. I do something very similar. So I use Ecamm. There's another program I use to record my screen. I have a microphone and I literally go through the task, explaining how I do it. And then I do a couple things. One, I don't use, let's say I've hired somebody and we'll get into that, but like I've hired a new assistant. I don't use their name in the video. Like, hey, Michelle, here's how I do this. Because you know why? Because when I hire people, let's say I usually hire them for one task initially to try them out. So we're now combining 4 and 5, but I usually hire them for something very concrete for like 2 weeks. And I say, at the end of 2 weeks, we're going to reassess. And if you don't like it, then, we'll part ways. If I don't like it, we'll part ways, so that there's very little investment in the beginning. But then if it doesn't work out, most of the time it does, but let's say for the rare occurrence, the instance it does. And I have now recorded that video. So it's that much easier to hire somebody else for that job. And all I do is I upload the video to YouTube as an unlisted video. I take that URL, I put it in a Google Doc. So I know, like, here is my training for Instagram. And there's the link, so that for whoever else, ultimately, let's say 2 years down the line, I need to find a new assistant to do Instagram. I got the video. And then I can just send that video. And one thing I do is say, I'm open to any questions that you have. Please, like, overly reach out to me for questions. So tell me your strategy for document. Now, and by the way, that's really all I do. Like, I'm not making lists. Like, I'm not typically, I'm sharing maybe login credentials, but like, I'm mostly documenting via video or proceduralizing.
Yes, totally. My process is very, very similar. I'm going to use one specific example just because it was probably the way that I've used this proceduralize and outsource at its best, which was, I did the same thing as you. I recorded the video. And oftentimes, as I'm speaking and demonstrating, I am formulating the sequence of steps more clearly by just showing them than I would if I was calling it up and typing it out. So I'll record the video as my first step. But then what I did was I actually stored my video inside Google Drive instead of on YouTube, for privacy mostly, but just because everything was contained in that Google Drive folder anyway. And you can embed. So here's what I did was I used Google Slides to create a series. So it was like, I hired one time I had about 9 different Upworkers who were all doing a particular research project. They were all doing the same project, but just on different segments of a database. And so what I did was I created this one slide deck per person, and kind of personalized it a little bit because they were working on different things. But it was basically a copy, and you can embed your Google Drive videos into your slide presentations. So then they would watch the slide, they would read one page at a time, and then they could click and play the videos that were embedded on that page and keep going. And then, similar to you, I'm very emphatic about, I'd rather you ask questions than make mistakes. But it worked out very, very well. And then based on the questions that are asked, then that document can get enhanced. But basically, I hired my first and second person. And then when I hired my 3rd through 9th person, I had that system dialed and I could just duplicate it and hand it to them. And when I, similar to what you said about trying someone out, when I first hired my assistant, like, I have an assistant that I've worked with now for 12 years. But when I first hired her, I hired 2 other people before her. And so, with the first person, I created a bunch of documents. With the second person, even more documents. By the time my assistant, who's now still with me, came along, I had all of these assets, and they were assets for my business. And the most amazing, it was like having a drug that you get a taste of, and then you're like, I'm hooked. And that drug was documenting a procedure for something I didn't like doing and never having to do it again.
Absolutely. In fact, there was just like, I had a task, and one of my assistants who had been with me for a really long time had to leave for family reasons. And I'm like, what are the tasks that I've even assigned her to? Because it's just this well-oiled machine. And I had to go back and go, okay, wait, she was doing this. And then I had that panicked moment of like, oh no, if I have to retrain her on this, how will I do it? And then I had the videos, and I was like, yes, Yes. Oh my God. I don't have to recreate this. I don't have to, again, it goes back to my thing about having to relearn platforms that I had to learn at one point. It was like all there. So that too, I had that moment of like, yes, I don't have to go back to all of these things that cause headaches. So yes.
Totally. And one thing that comes to mind for me, well, two things. First thing is that I think we settle into, and I'm absolutely guilty of this, we settle into such a comfort zone with the person, if we worked with them for a really long time, of not newly documenting changes because they're just, they already know what they're doing. And so if my assistant left me, I would have quite an undertaking to gather together and piece together what's still current and, maybe update things and refresh, which I think is just normal. But what I was also going to say, maybe I've just lost what I was going to say. Maybe that was the more important point to make. Oh, I know. I was going to give some examples. I was going to say that we don't have to document like every single thing, right? It could be your podcast production, and then that's its own little bundle and it has its own little thing. And then what happens at some point if that person who does that podcast production leaves, you could just pass that on. You could have the same person doing 10 different things, but I like them as little bundles so that if they are specifically related. So a couple of ideas was like podcast production, image creation, if you make Facebook ads or like any kind of graphics, and then we also talked a little bit how even though your audience is bloggers, like copywriting can still be very hard even for writers because it's hard to write about yourself or it's hard to see your own business from the outside. So even like outsourcing those sorts of things, that anything that gets repeated is just that weight off your shoulders of not having to do it yourself. I'm just trying to think if we can leave the audience with a few ideas of like what could be outsourced, and maybe you've got some more perspective on the blogging side of things.
Well, what I would say is figure out what tasks you hate, that you dread. For me, it's always, what am I pushing? What I know I need to do in the morning that does not get done until 6:15 at night because, oh God, I got to get dinner on the table. And now I have, 10 minutes and I'm rushing and I hate this, but I've now pushed it off. I've had dread all day and I've pushed it off. That is a task that I hate. So is that
proofreading? Proofreading would be a good one.
Totally. Like, is that something? Usually for me, it's actually stuff like posting on it on Facebook or Pinterest or just stuff like that. So is this a task that you could automate, right? Where it's like more procedural than it needs to be like your creativity, your special sauce, and start there. And really, I do not recommend like hiring a VA for 20 hours a week. No.
Or somebody who does everything, because the unicorns, they're hard to find.
Totally. So then hire for one simple task. Go to Upwork, go to Fiverr, hire for one tiny task, like I was saying, and do potentially a 2-week trial, right? So you go, hey, is this working for you? It's working for me. Is it working for you? Great. Let's keep going. And you will find those diamonds, but you don't necessarily know they're diamonds when you first hire them, but you'll slowly notice, hey, that person's doing a really good job. I've got this other task that I hate. What if I can create procedures, create a video and say to them, hey, you want more work from me? And that is how I have found my superstars.
I love it.
Have you had a similar situation?
Yeah, I have this one assistant who's worked for me for full-time for 12 years. And then I've generally just hired for specific tasks, video editing. When I upload to get the SRT file, the file that's the captions for videos. So like inside of my course, all my videos are captioned and there's a transcript. And so even though I don't want it to be perfect, I do want it to be scanned for blatant mistakes, like, because it's all AI that does the transcription. So I've hired somebody who reads through that, or somebody who reviews my videos and makes sure that the editor has adequately blurred sensitive information, because I don't want to have to go rewatch it. It's not worth my time to go do that, because that's not something that there's no skill. Not that there's no skill, there's some attention span and attention to detail, but like it doesn't require my degree of skill. And so that's another thing that I've outsourced. So like the proofing of that. I'm trying to, I mean, the data collection and research, I've done a lot of outsourcing. Yeah, there's, I mean, and there's lots of things that I probably can and should be outsourcing at this point that I just have been, well, this is like maybe a whole other conversation and perhaps a little less on the productivity front, but maybe it's just very, very much reality is when we get to the point of being so busy that we're ready to outsource, that's the point at which we're like, oh, I don't have time to do this. So it's like a little irony or a catch-22 of reaching that point. And so sometimes it's nice to be proactive, like what you've done, where you've just taken like one or two little tasks, you take those off your plate. Maybe that delays that feeling of, oh, I'm so busy, but also it gives you somebody to call on when you have something new that you want to add or remove from your plate and add to someone else's, because now you at least have some people who could potentially take on some work from you. So maybe, and I love Upwork for this, just because you can have somebody who works for you 5 hours a week.
And by the way, there have been times where there's something I have to do and I'm too busy. And I think to myself, I could outsource this. And I would say, all I do is record the video, the training video, and I can have somebody hired in 10 minutes to try out. So it is really easy. And you can find people, especially if it is some sort of repetitive task, it's usually not that expensive to just get a couple hours of work. And it is. And so think about it this way, as a blogger, as a content creator, what is the one thing that we need to be is consistent. You need to be putting out consistent content, and it can be a pain and it can feel like drudgery. So how can you lighten your load? How can you set yourself up and be kind to yourself by taking a couple hours, hiring somebody for a couple hours to do the things that make you not want to be consistent, that you dread, that I save until 6:15. Those tasks are perfect.
And you're exercising a muscle. You are exercising the letting go, non-micromanaging, the trusting someone else, the seeing that it's possible to have something accomplished without you being the person who accomplishes it. And when you, like I said, like the taste of that drug, like you're actually exercising that part of you that may not come naturally. I know it's a bit of a struggle for me at times to let go of things, but then there's also the joy of letting go of it. Mm-hmm. And that kicks in, and it completely counteracts the dread of having to document and hand it off and hire someone. All of those things get erased with the joy that comes with it. So this is actually, like, especially just handing off some small piece is a really valuable skill to have as a business person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dara, thank you. This has been terrific. So I want everybody who listens to this episode, please email me and tell me your favorite tip, or which one you do, or which one you're planning to do, because I always find this inspiring of like, what else can I do to lighten my load? Like, one thing I will be doing after this conversation is just documenting more. Because I think, like how I can't seem to scan documents with my phone, like, you know what? I'm going to just take a screenshot of where to find the menu that somehow I can never find. So I feel like the more I can set myself up for success so that I don't have to be reinventing the wheel, just the happier I will be.
I have a tip for you. Did you know that Loom comes as a phone app?
No.
So you could very easily, and I actually do this quite regularly, is you can actually take a video instead of a screenshot. So you could turn on Loom and you could go and walk through the steps. Oh, hey, Jillian, hey, future Jillian, here's how you take this. And then you do it, and then make sure you name your Loom video so that it's findable, because otherwise it'll just come up with like iPhone, whatever, and the date. Name it so that you know what it is, and then store it. You could even go into Loom and download the MP4 if you want, put it into a Google Drive, or you could put it in as a private YouTube video. But just as another option to screenshots on a phone that you can actually document steps in video.
But that is the one that I think I will be incorporating much more into my life. Okay, Dara, if people want to reach out to you, learn more about you, what you offer, your download, how can they do that?
So if you want to stalk me, my name is Dara Sklar, and I'm pretty much everywhere. There is another Dara Sklar out there in the world, but that's a whole other story. You can reach me at withdara.com. So that's my website. And if you want to grab that top 40 PDF, if you didn't do that at the last episode, or if you want to do that and you're only listening to this one, it's withdara.com/top40. And that's the top 40 Google hacks you'll wish you'd been using all along.
Awesome. Well, I have to say, Dara, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me again. I really appreciate it.
I hope you got some additional good tips from Dara. For me, it's the whole concept of my present day self and my future self, and how I want to continually do stuff in the present to set my future self up for success. It's almost like I'm two people, like the TV show Severance, just not as creepy. So again, if you are not a member of my Facebook group, please join. It's the Become a Blogger Genius Facebook group, and I would love to welcome you in there. And I will see you here again next week.